Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Andrew Ross Sorkin of the New York Times and CNBC, and it's a privilege to be with all of you, especially to have the following discussion about really what is, you've probably heard the phrase now, polycrisis here in Davos. And there are three words on the screen: the interplay of food, energy, and water. And those are, in their own ways, the crisis that we're going to be talking about this afternoon. But hopefully we're not just going to talk about what is the problem. We're going to try to get to some of the solutions and also debate some of the challenges ahead. Let me just tell you, we have such a great group of people to have this conversation with us. Your Excellency, Tran Hong Ha is here. He is the Deputy Prime Minister of Vietnam, and he's been doing some remarkable things in terms of the public-private sector on this very topic. And Beathe, Tvinnereim, is the Minister of International Development of Norway. We're going to have a discussion with her about some of the remarkable things that they've been thinking about in terms of agriculture. Ramon Laguarta is here. He's the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of PepsiCo, of course, one of the largest consumer packaged goods companies and food companies in the world, and playing a major role in this topic. And then Raj Kumar Singh is the Minister of Power and Ministry of New and Renewable Energy of India. The climate and energy play a huge role in this discussion about food. And then finally, Idris Elba is here. He's an actor, of course, but he is the Goodwill Ambassador to the International Fund for Agriculture Development, and he just won the Crystal Award. You've seen him in all sorts of films and other things. As you very well know, Luther, and I don't need to even go on. Mandela. I mean, we can do the whole list. He's Stringer Bell to me. I told him this earlier. I should also tell you he's a DJ. Just won the Crystal Award with his wife. They have a podcast together, which you should check out. And oddly enough, maybe not oddly enough, I want to start the conversation with you. And the reason I want to do that is because you've decided to take on this issue from a different place in some ways. And you've decided to try to bring attention to this issue in ways that, frankly, many have not. And I want to understand how that came to be, why this topic, and what you've learned.
Yeah. Look, you know, when in your introduction, you said, Idris, but the reason he's here, and you know, why am I here? And it's an important question to ask. Why am I here? Well, the main reason is I'm a human being, I'm a global citizen, I care about our planet, and I care about the disparity between, you know, what's happening with our food systems. That's why I'm here. I also happen to be an entertainer who has an incredible soapbox. These wonderful gentlemen and lady in front of us are very esteemed in their professions, but they don't know The Rock. I know The Rock. And I can call The Rock and amplify things my esteemed colleagues cannot. But it's not from a point of view of vanity or anything like that. It's because we are in a crisis and have been since the 80s regarding food, if not before. I grew up in at a time period watching Ethiopia go through a famine. And what have we done about that since then? We're still here having the same debate. In fact, now we're having, as you said, a poly-crisis moment. And so what do? We act. And how do we act? We have to bang the drum and make some noise. So that's why Sabrina and I work with IFAD, who for 40 years have been working in this space, thinking about smallholder farmers, thinking about food systems, and implementing and working with governments to future-proof. Just so happens we have a crisis and now we're all scrambling. So that's why I'm here, because I can speak loudly to it, and I care about it.
Let me just follow up with this, and we can put stats on this, but I'm hoping you can maybe put a story to it. The number of those facing acute food insecurity has soared from 135 million to 345 million. This is just since 2019. That's a total of 49 million people in 49 countries that are teetering on the edge of famine. You took a trip to Sierra Leone.
Yes.
Tell us about that trip and what you saw.
I went to Sierra Leone. My parents are from Sierra Leone. My mom is from Ghana, born in Ghana. My dad in Sierra Leone, right? But I consider myself a Sierra Leonean, consider myself an African. IFAD invited me to go see one of their programs. It was the first time I'd gone to Sierra Leone, and when I was there, it was a homecoming. It was very welcoming. But it was also a first-hand look at a country that has seen some hard times, you know, a resilience, a country that 60% is farmland, and the food should come from their farmland. And through Ebola, through civil war, you know, we've seen people suffering in that very small country. So IFAD moved in and did a program. I went to see this program, and it was like, you know, real proof that if we have some investment in smallholder farming, you know, we will see change. Not only is the investment going to keep growing, but people teach people. And that's what I went to see and understood. And it was fascinating for me. And it completely cemented Sabrina and I's commitment to working and amplifying what IFAD are doing. That's why I went there. And I could see now, since Sabrina and I have been to different programs with IFAD, that the system is replicable and works. Now, currently what we're seeing is a scramble to find these systems. And that's why I'm here at Davos, in an incubator of thought and management and movement to try and push the agenda a little bit further.
Let's talk about one of those systems, because it's happening in Vietnam. And Your Excellency, I want to speak to the public-private partnership that you've been working on, both to feed your people, but specifically in the world of rice. They've been doing some remarkable things in terms of how you've been rethinking resource conservation, carbon, and the like. Tell us about that program, what it is, what the challenges have been, and who pays for it all.
Trước hết thì thưa các quý vị, các quý bà, quý ông. Tôi ở một cái đất nước Việt Nam là có tiếng là nông nghiệp. Nhưng mà tôi nhớ lại là những cái giai đoạn đầu ấy, thì nông nghiệp Việt Nam cũng không cung cấp đủ cái lương thực cho người Việt Nam. Và Việt Nam cũng ở trong tình trạng là thiếu lương thực, đói kém. Và cái xuất phát điểm ở chỗ là chúng ta cần phải có một cái tầm nhìn của các nhà.
And on that background, there was a need for policy and governance capacity. We thought about what policies we could roll out to help the farmers, the people. So from that, may I emphasize the role of the government and the public sector. The government needs to have policies to help farmers stay independent in their use of land. And the government needs to protect the land area for agriculture. The area of land for culture must be on par with the number of farmers. In Vietnam, we are retaining 3.8 million hectares for agricultural land. And this land is not just for agriculture, it's for the whole ecosystem. The farmers used to, and still now, having difficulties in accessing technology, know-hows. They have difficulties in terms of facilities and equipment for their production, because land in Vietnam is not often vast. So private land used by farmers and households are not vast. So they have difficulties in developing scalable irrigation system, planting system. So this is where the government needs to exercise their role to protect the rights of the people. Also, the government needs to engage scientists and businessmen in this course. By doing so, we can set up a connection, a linkage between farmers and other stakeholders. And only with knowledge and technology and know-how can farmers upscale their production. And may I emphasize the role of public-private partnership here. And other than that, all countries in the value chains, from the countries in the value chains, we can see that some of them have favorable natural conditions and some don't. A trend we see is that farmers are usually not wealthy ones. So what we need to do is to set up partnership among all stakeholders, production ones, consumer ones and other stakeholders in the whole value chain, so we can share, we can make contributions, we share profits with each other. So I think the theme today, the interplay of food, energy, and water, is a very suitable, fitting topic. Food, energy, and water are interrelated. But they're not just complementary, but there can also be friction among these resources. So this is also where the government can exercise its role in balancing between these resources, and ensure that each sector can develop fully.
I want to go to you on this because this topic has often been put in the bucket of ESG for big corporations, multinational corporations. And we were talking backstage about this issue that in boom times, big multinational corporations often, when everything's profitable and there's excess profit, people are willing to do all sorts of things, sometimes even charitable things that they may not otherwise do in challenging economic times. And I wanted to put that to you, to actually just how you think about that, especially in the context of the economy we now are living in. And obviously there's always hand-wringing in Davos about the economy, but I think it's fair to say right now people have demonstrable worries about what the next year or two looks like. We have the Russia-Ukraine war ongoing and other externalities that are putting pressure on things, including the price of oil, which has its own impact on food and fertilizer. And I want to talk to Anne about that in just a second. And then we're going to talk to you about the price of oil as well.
No, listen, I'm a firm believer that crises are opportunities as well. And we have to take crisis as an opportunity. When we manage the company, obviously we have to be managing the short term, but most important responsibility for me and my leadership team is how does PepsiCo become a very successful company or continues to be a very successful company 20 years from now? So if you take that horizon, there are some major transformations we need to make to the company to continue to be preferred by consumers, be able to attract the right leaders, actually being able to operate in communities like Vietnam or India or some of the other Norway, right? So when we look at that future, we said, okay, there's a few key transformations for our company. We put that under the PEP positive transformation end-to-end strategy. And there's one that is around climate smart agriculture. We are mainly an agriculture company. We buy 26 crops in 200 countries. So agriculture company. How do we make agriculture regenerative and sustainable and also obviously positive for the planet? Second one is net zero. Net zero in general, decarbonizing our company, making sure that we bring back to communities the water that we use. So there's a water component to the transformation. That we need to make our transportation low emissions. We are the largest private fleet in the US. So we have to make our trucks run on clean energy. We have to make sure that our facilities use renewable energy. So clearly an end-to-end transformation. And then we have our brands. We have beautiful brands that have the power to educate consumers on what is sustainability, the value of sustainability, and separating products that are more sustainable versus the ones that are not sustainable. So we connect agriculture to consumers in a way that very few companies can do it, and we have the responsibility to do it. We have the responsibility for the long term of the company. A few things I think we're talking a lot about energy. We don't talk enough about food. And food is probably the most important thing. And the agriculture system is a huge emission at this point. It's a contributor to, I think, 33% of the emissions, total emissions in the planet. It uses almost 80% of the fresh water. So clearly an intervention on the food system can have massive positive influence in everything else, right? And agriculture cannot be only a reduction of emissions, but a sequestration of carbon. So to me, there's a few things we need to do as a group. One, elevating food. Second, elevating farmers. Farmers, if we don't make farming sexy, and I think we were talking early, if we don't make farming sexy, there will be no next generation of farmers. So we have to make sure that farmers love their profession, they can earn their living, and we have to create a P&L around farmers that is positive. They can earn a living. They can continue to invest in their business. We have a responsibility, along with governments, to make that transition happen. We can help with technology, with training, with funding, and I think that's the work that we can discuss in the panel. But it's undergoing, and it's happening, and it's the future of our company.
But Anne, speak to this, because we're in a time of what some people would describe as runaway inflation around the globe. And this is impacting the price of food. So you talk about it's impacting the price of energy. This is happening as we all want to get to net zero desperately. That unto itself is, at least from a transitory perspective, is going to increase the cost of everything anyway. Then you layer on top a war and issues of national security and the like, and all of a sudden there's even a backlash, some people would argue, around how we're approaching the climate and how we're doing it. Are we doing it too fast or too slow or too this or too, right? That's where we are. So what is the lesson of that in how we think about the food piece of this?
Okay, a big chunk of the price of food is the price of energy. And a big chunk of the price of fertilizer is the price of energy, obviously. We should talk a lot more about fertilizers, because all farmers need fertilizers. The soil needs nutrients, and especially then degraded soil, unhealthy soil. And we know that many of the small-scale farmers that Idris is concerned about, that we are concerned about, are trying to make a living from very poor soil. And we know that at the moment, 10% of the global population is hungry, okay? This is exacerbated by the current crisis and the war, but it started a long time ago. Ever since 2014, the number of people going hungry has increased. And now with the prices of fertilizers and energy, this is going to get a lot worse unless we act. And if I can go back to the small-scale farming, because it's kind of absurd that many of the people who go hungry are themselves food producers. And now we'll be increasing costs of input. It's going to get a lot worse. And this is, I mean, we're at Davos, so we should talk business. And the fact is that the agricultural sector is a huge business opportunity. And it is slightly absurd, for example, that the African continent imports a lot of the foodstuffs, some $60 billion worth of foodstuff every year. But every small-scale farmer in Africa is a businessman or a businesswoman, and with quite, easily available technology, water, fertilizer. This is a business opportunity. So that's why I'm at Davos, because I really think that we need to rethink the food systems, the global food system and the national food systems, and that means we have to invest in agriculture, and we need to start with the small-scale farmers who actually produce most of the food that is available in Africa. So, but it's all interconnected, right?
And, we were also, again, not to take our backstage on stage, but the issue of fertilizer. Fertilizer can be used in great ways, and also, Idris, we could talk about it can be used in ways that aren't necessarily great either. And the question is sort of how do you govern that issue, if you will?
That's for me.
Or if Idris wants to jump in.
Yeah, well,
both of you guys
there's a lot of interesting work going on there. Just this morning, I took part in an event called the Global Fertilizer Challenge. The fact is that if we map the soil, we can use precision agriculture we can use fertilizer in a much smarter way, making sure that it doesn't go to waste and become a polluter,
right.
And also to make sure that the small-scale farmers don't use, they can use it more wisely and make sure that it creates exactly. So we need to do the mapping. We need to get the technologies out there, but it's already available. We need the investments.
Right. Just jump in. What you were going to?
Well, look, I think when it comes to the interplay between food, energy, and water, and we talk about food systems, for me, at a governance level, So it's one thing to have an agricultural minister. That's one thing. But to have a food minister, a food systems ministry, is a different set of, it's actually the conundrum that we have here. Because food systems do rely on efficient energy policies, do rely on people policy, do rely and must rely on private sector partnerships, you know, because that skill set as a minister of food systems is one that's multifaceted.
Raj, I want to go to you, talk about energy. Talk about the cost of energy, talk about the economics of energy, and everything's a trade-off. And I was going to talk about the moral trade-offs that are involved in this. And maybe people say that you can't have a trade-off when it comes to morality. We can debate that too. But the reason I raise this is right now India continues to import and buy lots of oil, as you know, from Russia. Amidst this war, lots of people look at that and say, "Why are you doing that? We don't like you doing that." But it has to do with the economics of this. So please, yes, please answer.
Yeah. Now, this is an aside, by the way. It's not germane to the question. But the quantum of oil and or not oil, the quantum of gas, etc., we import from Russia in a month is something which all Europe combined consumes in a day from Russia. So the quantum is that. But basically, if you are talking fossil, non-fossil, then India is the only major economy whose energy transition is consonant with a sub-2-degree rise in global temperature. We achieved our NDCs 9 years in advance. We had said that we'll have 40% of our capacity coming from non-fossils by 2030. We achieved that in 2021, November. And therefore, in Glasgow, we upped our ambition and we said that in 2030, we'll have 50% of our capacity come from non-fossils, up from 40 to 50. And I shall cross that because I'm already at 264,000. If you take the renewable energy capacity which I have established and which is under installation, it is 264 gigawatts out of 408 gigawatts. And so 500 I'll reach. In emissions intensity reduction also, I'm a leader because I had pledged that by 2030, I'll reduce my emissions intensity by 33%, even though India's emissions intensity is 1/3 of the world average. 1/3 of the world average.
The Russian oil
and I just finished, 1 minute. And we've already reduced our emissions intensity by 30%. Now, recently, climate action, they came out with a ranking of countries. In the top 5 countries, India figures as a country, whose climate action is, the best in the world. And we are the largest economy in that. The other 4 are small economies. We are the largest major economy in that. Right. So as far as energy transition is concerned, we are a leader, we'll continue to be a leader. Green hydrogen, green ammonia. Right now, I have factories under construction for manufacturing 32 million tons of green ammonia. So that's energy transition. But let me tell you about the topic which we are discussing here today. Now,
Well, let me ask you one follow-up.
Food, energy, and water. Because we have done something. And what we have done in food, energy, and water, what we have done and what we are doing is something which can be an example. For example, we decided that we'll green our agriculture, right? So we came out with a program for solarizing the groundwater irrigation systems. And we set out with a target of 3.5 million pumps, which we shall solarize. Now we we've got a demand for solarizing 5.3 million pumps. We are solarizing that. We started a new system of having separate agriculture feeders, and we are solarizing those feeders, right? And then we are also sort of encouraging farmers to set up solar panels on their land, that they can use for other things.
So let me just ask you this then. If the Russian import of oil is such a small part of what's needed in terms of energy in your country, why wouldn't you decide not to import the oil at all from them?
Beg your pardon?
Well, if the Russian oil is such a small part of what's needed in India, why wouldn't you say, you know what, we don't need to import it then?
Basically, if you don't import your requirement, what will happen is that your prices will go up 3 or 4 times. Now my demand...
So it's significant then?
No, just hold on. Yeah, I mean, even the small margin is significant. I'll just tell you what's happened. In India, the energy demand increased by 10.6% this year. Last year, it increased by 8%. Despite that, we have not had any blackouts. My energy cost, my cost of power remains what it was, level. So it's such a large economy, no increase in prices at all of energy, I'm happy. And my economy is growing at 6.5%, 7%. My demand is growing at 10.5%. We are the largest, fastest growing large economy in the world.
I don't want to belabor the point. The reason I'm raising the issue is because I think food, energy, and water, for a lot of people, and I imagine one of the reasons you guys want to talk about this is it's a moral issue for people. And I think people look at the war between Russia and Ukraine as a moral one. And given your support by buying oil from Russia, it appears as if you are supporting them.
We have been buying oil from Russia for a long time. Now, you say that the war in Ukraine is something which should result in people sort of cutting off oil supplies. That's your perspective. That's your perspective.
There's obviously a lot of multinational companies and countries that have done that.
We have a conflict with our northern neighbor. Did you do that? No. You continued buying from our northern neighbor. We had a conflict with our northern neighbor, right? On my border. I mean, and it is an expansionist neighbor. Did you do anything? No. That's the point. So basically, again, coming back to the topic, you have been talking about energy transition. Now suddenly you had this disruption. So now you don't talk about energy transition, you talk about energy security. Now let me tell you one thing. Coming back to this topic, if you talk to the farmers in Africa and you talk to them about energy transition, it means nothing. Why? Because 600 million people in Africa don't have access to energy. The farmers in Africa don't have access to energy. How do they irrigate their fields? Nobody's bothered. We are. What we did was, under the International Solar Alliance, we started a program for bringing solar irrigation to the farmers in Africa. Now, no company was willing to go to invest. Why? Because of the risk perceptions. So under the International Solar Alliance, we launched a fund for de-risking it and getting investment there. And up till now, I haven't had many contributions for that fund from developed countries. If you are worried, then do something about it. Right?
Ramon?
Yes. To the topic again, that we're talking too much about energy, not enough about food. Maybe we can.
Well,
because I think there is a very powerful concept of how do we create a movement towards transforming agriculture to regenerative agriculture, and I think it's a very powerful concept. And maybe we don't talk enough about it, and it helps with a lot of things. Livelihood of farmers. It helps with CO2 reduction. It helps with, making the soil, live for many years. It has so many powerful things. It will improve the yields, so it will solve for hunger and many other things. So I think we need probably worth talking about how do we make it happen.
Well, but that's what I want to ask you. I want to ask you about the marketplace, the market for this, because part of what within the sort of capitalistic system that exists so far is product that is priced, sort of premium priced product, frankly, probably for the crowd that hangs out at the World Economic Forum, who appreciates the way certain things are farmed. They may buy meatless products instead of meat, and they're willing to pay that premium, right? And there's a market that's being developed for that. The question is, how big is that market ultimately? Well, can the price come down with scale to a place where actually it's meaningful? And this goes back to sort of the energy food question, who pays for the transition?
Yeah, I think there could be a misperception there. I tell you, for example, one of our biggest brands, Lay's, we have the solutions, and we're actually making it happen, where a Lay's that is grown on a sustainable farm that has almost zero emissions in the factories, because we've changed to renewable energy, that is transported by electric vehicles to the consumer. that has the lowest sodium levels of any other potato in the market is not more expensive than some of the other potatoes in the market. So we can transform end-to-end a particular supply chain without really incurring in meaningful cost.
But that doesn't seem to be the case across the board for lots of different food products.
But there is a cost in some elements of that supply chain. Now, how companies manage the end-to-end process. So maybe my transportation is more expensive, but maybe I can save money by not using water in the factories or by moving to renewable energies, which are cheaper. So there is ways for us to manage the P&L, the overall cost of a product, and give the consumer a much more sustainable product. Now, the challenge for us as brand owners is how do we educate consumers to understand sustainability and make choices? So how do we drive demand towards the brands and the products that are, have a catalytic impact across the whole supply chain? And how do we help those consumers understand there is a lot of discussion about environmental labeling, some simple ways to tell consumers this is a more sustainable product than others. Once we do that, we're going to create such a massive
But I think there's a fairness to say that look, this is like EVs, electric vehicles, right? For the last 10 years, EVs, for the most part, have cost more than cars that are powered by fossil fuels. And eventually, we will get there. But there's sort of a leading edge group.
There is.
And that's, I imagine, likely with food. And the question is, can you build that market? And by the way, even with EVs, unfortunately, I could argue we're not there yet.
And I think, again, there is, the World Economic Forum has been very good at creating the Alliance for Early Mover Alliance for adopters of new technology and new products. And I think large companies and medium-sized companies, but mostly large companies, we have to carry the cost of enabling the scaling of new technologies and new products. And that cost is relevant, but it's not relevant in, like, we're a $90 billion company, right? So we can make a lot of trade-offs. We have this responsibility. But I would like, since there are 3 members of government here, I'd like for...
Anne had her hand up.
This is an ecosystem solution, right?
That trade-off that he's talking about, Ramon's talking about of a big corporation like that, as it relates to smallholder farmers, private sector needs to be incentivized in that middle ground, that early, how you phrased it, early lookers.
Adopters.
Early adopters.
Right.
There needs to be some real dialogue towards the private sector to adopt that. And the bigger companies need to help society.
We are not getting to the point. We are not getting to the point. The point is, if we are serious about it, let's get to the point. The point is, how do you get investment to get irrigation for the poorer farmers in Africa? We can afford it to solarize our agriculture, but how do you do that for the poorer farmers in Africa? Let's talk about that. So you'll have to de-risk it. Now, that is absolutely essential. Now, the water is the first priority for agriculture. Then fertilizer is another priority. Now, fertilizer is, again, something which is fossil fuel-based right now, but you can make it green.
Right.
And for fertilizer, in India, we are doing it. We are testing, and then we are applying fertilizers, and then we are going to green the ammonia. We are replacing gray ammonia with green ammonia for fertilizers. Now, this can also be carried through Africa. Now, that is what you see, basically, you have to divide it in 2 parts. And let's not digress, let's talk about the topic. One is the marginal farmer. His problems are different. The other is the richer farmer. Now, his problems are much less. We talk about the marginal farmer, he is on a subsistence farmer. So get water to him at least cost. How do you do that? I believe renewables is an answer. And fertilizer, how do you reduce the price of fertilizer? You reduce the price of green ammonia, reduce the price of ammonia. Right now, gray ammonia costs $1,100 a ton. If I make green ammonia, I think my estimate is it will cost $600 a ton. So that's what I plan to do in my country.
Right.
And I think that needs to be extended to Africa if we are serious about it. And incidentally, again, I can stop imports of Russian oil. Let European countries do that first. I import 1/10 of what Europe imports from Russia, by the way. So have that stopped first, and then you tell me I'll stop it.
And then I want to go to Your Excellency.
Yeah.
Maybe you can respond to both of those issues.
That's why do that, and I'll say, I'm a member of the government. I'll do that.
Anne's going to reply, and then I want to bring Your Excellency into this.
I beg to differ, sir. But the fact is that we have all these instruments, and you're quite right. We need to invest in renewable energy in Africa, but we have the instruments.
But you just need to de-risk it.
Sure, we have de-risking mechanisms. They're all there, and we are investing.
No, but
in
they
them.
have to be deployed in Africa.
And we are, and in India, actually. And just last year, Norway launched a new climate investment fund, which just actually last year invested in a huge solar
So let's have a
plant in
discussion with
India.
the International Solar Alliance.
But the thing is that you need to include also small-scale farmers on that. I don't believe in that division between industrial farmer and small-scale farming in Africa, because if the solution is to get those small-scale farmers on board and get them linked to the value chains and have decentralized, like what you were talking about, get those products into industrialization and connecting them to the value
they won't be able to afford the inputs if the inputs are expensive. That is the problem. You see, I can afford, if I am a large farmer, I can afford to pay more for water. Now the marginal farmer cannot. We have to bring down the cost of water for the marginal farmer. I have to bring down the cost of fertilizer for the marginal farmer. I mean, he just can't afford the cost of fertilizer, which prevails today.
Yeah, but there are multiple problems to solve, right? The marginal farmer might need some intervention, but I think the transformation of
and most of the farmers in Africa are
Norway, in the US, in South Africa, in Brazil, in Vietnam, this is also necessary. We don't need to only try to solve for that marginal farmer. I think it's a holistic transformation of
somebody who owns 500 acres and is farming on 500 acres, he will buy the inputs. I mean, he doesn't need your assistance.
Not necessarily. I mean, there's a lot of people in between, right? So I was just in Vietnam, in Hai Lai, and we were doing a lot of potato farming there, and we're increasing the yields of these 2 hectares. 2 hectares.
And that's, I mean,
we
a small
can bring
farmer.
them the technology.
And 1 hectare,
we
2
can
hectares.
bring them, the practices. We can incentivize them with higher prices. We don't need to. Sometimes we create
the large farmer will make more profit supplying to Pepsi. But the small farmer,
but we're talking about the transition here, right? And the idea is, if we're talking about
the small farmer has to sell. The small farmer has to sell his produce in the local market.
Your Excellency has been very patient, and I know you want to get in. The gloves have come off on a conversation I did not imagine they would. Please.
Thưa các đồng nghiệp của tôi.
Colleagues, time is precious, so we should not spend time arguing about global trends, global recognized trends. Transition is something that we all agreed on globally, and this trend is irreversible. We should not argue over this. What I think we should discuss is what to do to make agriculture sustainable, resilient, and reduce its 30% use of power and increase the use of biomass energy, for example, to make it environmentally friendly. How to make agriculture water saving, to balance between agriculture and hydro electricity and hydro energy. So I think what we need to discuss is the food transition, energy transition, water management in a comprehensive and shared way. Thank you.
For bringing the conversation back.
Really?
We need some.
But let me then ask the question that he just, or re-ask the question that he just asked, which is, okay, we've got about 5 minutes. Let's talk solutions in a real way. Which is, if you're gonna land the plane on these 3 issues, the interplay of food, energy, and specifically water, and the price of all these things, and part of the debate is real that you guys just had. But what do you do? What do you do?
What do I do?
First of all, you begin by having a concern for the for the small farmer. That's the first thing. And if you have a concern, then follow it up with money. That means de-risk it, investment will go. The small farmer needs irrigation at less price. The small farmer needs fertilizers at less cost. The small farmer needs a secure market.
Anne?
Yeah, no, we agree. I don't think we disagree on that. The fact is that de-risking should be an essential element in policies like mine as Minister of International Development. And we know that it works. We get the technologies out there with quite small money. I was in...
But how much of that is a subsidy, right? I mean, how much of that is government subsidy that we're now talking about? How much of that is NGOs and charity, effectively, that's sort of supporting this? And how much of it is the private sector? And is there a market-based solution that actually does it on its own? Is it?
It's, you know, if I can use aid money, taxpayers' money from Norway to unleash private money, that is a great investment. And just the climate investment fund that I mentioned, €1 unleashes 9 private euros.
Right.
I mean, that's a great investment. We do the same in de-risking mechanism in the World Bank called MIGA, which is targeting the most vulnerable conflict-prone countries like Somalia. I was in Somalia just a few weeks ago and saw an investment where, you know, quite small aid money can unleash the potential of private investment. And that, I think, is the way ahead. For the agricultural sector.
Jump in. This is like the Suicide Squad, sort of.
But I think it's a combination of a few things, you know, and one of them, which we haven't really talked about, is the youth, right? The marketplace is in the youth, you know. As someone that's young now is part of the adult system tomorrow, and they bring with that a want to work, a want to eat. There is an ecosystem attached to that, and I think we also have to think about, you know, implementing systems that have worked already. So, yes, private investors want to get involved. They do. How do we incentivize them? You know, we see it in different sectors. You know, we see multi-ecosystems around different sectors. In my film industry, there's multi-ecosystems. In farming, it's not just the farming. There is all the engines and all the ancillaries around it that need promotion, need incentivizing, need government's assistance, need promoting, which is where I come in.
Right. Ramon?
Yeah, I would make every country in the world accountable to make a food transition program to sustainable agriculture. I mean, I think this is every country.
Is this the equivalent of like a net zero style program for some? What would be the metrics? How would you do that?
Yeah, this is elevating the food to the top, changing the food system to the top of the priorities in every country around the world, putting the farmer at the center, making sure the farmer makes good money, making sure the farmer helps us to decarbonize the economy, making sure the farmer uses less resources, less fertilizers, less water, incentivizing, and then making private-public interventions, which we are, but a much more intentional, committed focus. I think this is a priority, an urgency. I would say we need to talk
and
about
speak that.
food.
Can I just ask one question on top of it, though? Which is, why do you think, so we talk about the climate all the time. It has been elevated as a central issue of our time. Oddly enough, I would argue food has not. And food is such an immediate, right in front of you issue. And I wonder why you think that is. Meaning, why you think it is that it has not been. You know, he talked about it, putting it at the top of everything, effectively. Why do you think it hasn't been?
Because you can go into a supermarket and buy your food right now. Yeah. And that's not the case for most of the world. Yeah. Most of the world can't do that. Yeah. And until everyone is starving, then it will become a topic. Trust me. It happened in the pandemic. You saw people in LA, in food lines, couldn't get food. And suddenly the media are talking about food crisis. Yeah. That's partly why.
Because these people are growing their own food. And for some of us, that's hard to imagine, but that's where food comes from. Right. Surprise. Well, one thing is the emission side of the climate issue and food. The other side is climate adaptation, and you know, just because that's where we need to invest as well, especially when we talk about developing countries. Because
and what do you mean by that?
No, we need to give these small-scale farmers the techniques, the technologies, the agronomy to be able to adapt to a changing climate. Because this is an issue. I mean, this is. These farmers don't have insurance. When the rain doesn't come, or when the rain comes too hard, they lose everything. Yeah. But again, we have the techniques, we have the solution, we know what to do, but it takes investments. And if we can, make sure that these small-scale farmers become part of a value chain and become businessmen and women,
Right.
we can create those good circles that will make it possible for them to invest in that technology, which is available, and produce a surplus along the value chain and create jobs for those generations of youths, especially in Africa, that will need. We will need a lot of jobs in the value chains of the agriculture.
One-line answer to your question is this, that the people who set the agenda today in the world are not hungry. They have never had to go without food. So food is not on the agenda. That's the problem.
Idris, last word to you.
I think it's a policy level thing. We have to make it policy. We have to, you know, if we're going to all be governed by a small sector of people, then they have to make food a policy.
Yes.
We're going to run out of time, Your Excellency. Yeah. The final word to you, sir. Yeah. Go ahead.
I believe that the three issues we touch upon today, no one could deny that they are global issues. Food is a global issue. We cannot live in a society that ignore people dying from poverty and famine. We cannot look at 2 billion people thirst of water. And we know that climate change is foreseeable, was foreseeable. And I believe that food and water and our whole society cannot survive without responses to climate change and without energy. So I believe these three issues and climate change are all global issues and urgent issues. So we need to find a world that we can cooperate, we can work with each other based on scientific foundations. This is where we need to work together. Thank you.
All of our panelists for a tremendous discussion and an important topic. Thank you all. Appreciate it very much, and thank you all for being here.
That was fun.